When I was about 14 or 15, my dad started dating a woman we'll call Susan. My dad had always struggled with relationships, so when he reconnected with an old high school friend, it seemed like a fresh start for him. At first, I was happy for him. Susan was friendly, kind, and seemed to care about my dad. She even had 2 kids of her own, one older and one younger than me, though they didn't come around much. For a while, things were calm. My dad was happier than I'd seen him in years, and I thought maybe Susan was a positive influence in his life. But little by little, cracks began to show. Susan had a serious drug addiction, something my dad knew about but thought he could help her overcome. She had her moments of kindness, but they were mixed with mood swings and sudden bursts of rage. I hated confrontation, so her yelling matches with my dad often left me feeling anxious and emotional. Still, I tried to stay out of it, thinking it wasn't my place to get involved. Then my dad had a terrible accident while hunting in the woods behind our house. He fell from a tree stand and landed on a rock, completely shattering his kneecap. He needed surgery and months of recovery with heavy pain medication just to manage the constant agony. That's when Susan's true nature came out. During my dad's hospital stay, Susan barely showed up to check on him. Instead, she focused on her own problems, leaving me to visit him alone most of the time. When he finally came home on crutches, Susan's attitude shifted. She started sneaking into his room while he slept to steal his pain medication. At first, my dad didn't notice, but when he began running out faster than expected, he realized what was happening and started hiding the pills from her. Her response? She came to me. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen and tried to convince me to steal the pills for her. "It's not a big deal," she said almost casually. "If 2 or 3 go missing, your dad will never know." I froze, stunned by what she was asking. I knew it was wrong and told her no. She tried to pressure me, but I stood firm. I thought that would be the end of it, but Susan didn't back down. She began planting seeds of doubt, trying to turn me against my dad. After I refused to steal my dad's medication, Susan's tactics took a darker turn. She started targeting me emotionally, trying to manipulate me into doubting my dad's love for me. She'd catch me when I was feeling vulnerable, on bad days when my anxiety or self-esteem issues were already weighing on me, and she'd say things like, "Your dad doesn't really care about you anymore. All he does is focus on himself." At first, I brushed it off, but Susan was persistent. Over time, her words began to stick, especially during arguments with my dad. She'd subtly stoke the fire, egging me on when I was frustrated or upset. One night, after a particularly bad fight, Susan convinced me to run away. She planted the idea so skillfully, making it seem like it was my decision, and before I knew it, I was walking down the road with no real plan. Thankfully, the police found me quickly and brought me home. But the damage had already been done. My dad and I were yelling at each other constantly, both of us feeling hurt and betrayed without fully understanding why. It wasn't until we sat down and really talked things through that we realized Susan was behind it all. She had been manipulating us both, sowing discord to keep us distracted while she continued to take advantage of my dad. The final straw came when my dad discovered Susan was cheating on him. He had gone to her place, planning to break things off after realizing how toxic she was, only to find her there with her ex-boyfriend. That was it for my dad. Susan was out of our lives for good. Or so we thought. One day, I came home from school to find our house completely trashed. Furniture was overturned, drawers were emptied, and my dog was wandering around like nothing was wrong. Confused and scared, I called my dad, who rushed home immediately. When he arrived, he was furious. My room was ransacked, and my Xbox 360, Wii, and most of my games were gone. His room had also been torn apart, with one specific thing missing, his hidden stash of pain pills. We both knew instantly who was responsible. The only person my dog wouldn't have barked at was Susan. She knew the house well enough to get in, trash the place, and take what she wanted without anyone stopping her. I suggested calling the police, but my dad had other plans. "This is personal," he said. And when my dad, a tough ex-military man, said something like that, it was clear he meant business. My dad wasted no time. Over the next few days, he quietly began gathering information, asking around town until he figured out where Susan and her ex, Tim, were staying. Tim was known as a wannabe gangster, someone who liked to talk tough but rarely backed it up. My dad didn't care, he was determined to handle this himself. On the fourth night, he found them. He told me to stay home as he grabbed his baseball bat and pocketknife and drove to Tim's house. I stayed awake, heart pounding, wondering if he was about to do something that would land him in jail. When he returned close to midnight, I saw a box of DVDs and random items in the back seat of his car. He told me he couldn't recover my stolen consoles, they'd already been sold, but he had a story to share. When he arrived at Tim's house, he honked the car horn loudly, forcing them to come outside. Susan and Tim emerged, confused, but Tim's expression quickly turned to fear when he saw my dad stepping out of the car with a baseball bat in hand. According to my dad, Tim froze like a deer in headlights. For all his talk about being a tough guy, Tim dropped to his knees and started begging for his life before my dad even said a word. Susan tried to retreat into the house, but my dad stopped her with a glare and a warning. "Don't move or I'll beat him right here." With Tim groveling and Susan cowering, my dad made his demands. He told Tim to strip down and give him his clothes. Terrified, Tim obeyed, handing over his shirt, pants, and shoes as my dad stood over him with the bat. Then my dad turned to Susan, warning her to stay far away from us or else. "I'll be back," my dad told them, loud enough to send chills down their spines. He loaded Tim's clothes into the car and left, leaving them humiliated and too scared to act. The next day, my dad told me to skip school and join him. We drove to Susan's house with a large cardboard box he'd packed the night before. When we arrived, Tim scurried into the bedroom like a frightened dog, while Susan tried to put on a brave face. My dad wasn't having any of it. He told Susan he was taking her entire DVD collection as compensation. "Pack it all up," he said to me, and I reluctantly obeyed. As I packed, my dad turned to Tim and reminded him that he had 1 week to leave town or he'd be back. Tim agreed without hesitation, promising to disappear. Before we left, my dad turned to Tim one last time. "Strip," he demanded again. Tim didn't even hesitate, pulling off his clothes as my dad watched, smirking. We drove off, leaving them with nothing but fear and humiliation. After that day, we never heard from Susan or Tim again. My dad's message was loud and clear, and they were too terrified to try anything else. Tim must have taken the warning seriously because, by the end of the week, he was gone from town for good. Susan, from what little we heard through the grapevine, stayed behind but kept a low profile. Although we didn't recover my consoles or games, I felt a sense of closure. My dad had taken a stand, not just for himself but for me. After everything Susan had done to tear our family apart, seeing her and Tim get what they deserved was deeply satisfying. In the weeks that followed, life started returning to normal. My dad and I repaired the damage Susan had done, not just to the house but to our relationship. We had been through so much, and while the memories of Susan's manipulations lingered, they no longer held the power they once did. Reflecting on it now, I'm still in awe of my dad's courage and loyalty. He didn't just let this slide or depend on the authorities to clean up the mess. He stood up for us, reminding me of the strength and love a parent can have for their child. That experience taught me an important lesson about resilience and family. No matter how tough things get, having someone who's willing to stand by you makes all the difference. If you've ever faced a toxic person who tried to tear you down, remember that standing up for yourself, or having someone stand with you, can make a world of difference. Surround yourself with people who truly care and won't let you face life's challenges alone. For more stories about overcoming obstacles and standing strong, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let's share, learn, and grow together.